We have a sufficient number of people to start, and since this is going to take a while, I think we should get started. Today, do we have enough people here to hold it over?
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we have a quorum.
Okay, yeah. We have two items on our agenda: Kash Patel's nomination to serve as Director of FBI, and S331, the Fentanyl Act. Because the Halt Fentanyl Act is listed on the agenda for the first time, it'll be held over until our next meeting. Last week, committee Democrats exercised their right under the committee rules to hold Patel's nomination for 7 days. Obviously, we had to honor that hold from last week, so today is the day that we vote on this nominee. Now, we all know that Mr. Patel, like other nominees, undergo rigorous vetting. He's no exception. Before his hearing, he produced more than 1,000 pages of records, disclosed over 1,000 interviews. He underwent an FBI background investigation, produced a financial disclosure, and worked with ethics officials to identify and resolve potential conflicts of interest. At his hearing, he answered questions for more than 5 hours and provided 147 pages of responses to written questions. So, we've examined every detail of his life, and he's been subjected to relentless attacks on his character during this whole period of time. Now, what we've learned from this committee process is what we knew from his resume. Mr. Patel has spent his whole career fighting for righteous causes. He's been a public defender representing the accused against the power of the state. He's been a congressional staffer investigating the partisan weaponization of our legal system. And he served in key national security roles, protecting Americans from foreign enemies. He's received support from former FBI agents, former federal and state prosecutors, and organizations representing more than 680,000 law enforcement officers. But Mr. Patel's resume, his accomplishments, and his supports aren't why he's the best person for this job. Mr. Patel should be considered our next FBI director because the FBI has been infected by political bias and weaponized against the American people. Mr. Patel knows it. Mr. Patel exposed it, and Mr. Patel has targeted for it, and I've got plenty of examples to show what's wrong with the FBI. Mr. Patel was instrumental in exposing Crossfire Hurricane. He showed during that investigation that the Democratic National Committee funded false allegations against President Trump, that the Department of Justice and the Federal Bureau of Investigation hid information from the FISA court to wiretap a presidential campaign, and that an FBI lawyer lied in the process. As reward for his efforts to uncover this truth, he was attacked by the media, and the Department of Justice secretly subpoenaed his records. Now, I and my staff know a thing or two about this kind of retaliation because my staff received similar treatment during our investigation. Sadly, as I've said at Mr. Patel's hearing, Crossfire Hurricane is but one example of recent FBI misconduct. The FBI targeted traditional Catholic families and concerns of parents for political reasons. The FBI coordinated with social media platforms to suppress the Hunter Biden laptop scandal. The FBI conducted an unprecedented raid on President Trump's home in an act of partisan lawfare. In just the last few days, we've heard unconfirmed reports that someone at the FBI may have illegally leaked information about upcoming ICE raids, putting the lives of ICE agents at risk. If true, the betrayal can't be overstated. The FBI has fallen into really old habits and is long overdue for massive reform. Mr. Patel is the man to do it, and that's why he's being attacked so viciously right now. Before we even had a hearing, committee members called Mr. Patel by these adjectives: dishonest, untrustworthy, lacking in character, a wolf at the door, a conspiracy theorist, a staunch political loyalist, and lastly, a nightmare. Since his nomination was announced, committee Democrats have sent at least 11 letters to 11 different agencies and parties demanding records and urging investigation into Mr. Patel. Each letter breathlessly accuses Mr. Patel of something new, often citing quote unquote highly credible anonymous sources that don't fit the facts. Some accused him of not following hostage rescue protocol. Others suggested he is secretly directing FBI personnel decisions. And some accused him of promoting conspiracy theories. The purpose of this campaign is quite obvious: throw everything at the wall and hope something sticks. I'm not falling for it, and I don't believe the American people will likewise. These attacks are unfair, this harassment unwarranted. They show that Mr. Patel won't receive fair consideration from the opposition, and they're directed at a nominee who served his country during both Democratic and Republican administrations. I expect we'll hear more unfair attacks and character smears today, but I'd like to point out a few egregious ones that we've already heard. One of my colleagues suggested that Mr. Patel called the police officers that protected the Capitol on January 6 cowards in uniform, end of quote, or quote unquote. Now, this is completely false. Anyone can listen to this same interview that he gave to hear what he actually said. He said, senior Pentagon leadership who failed to mobilize the National Guard were, quote unquote, cowards in uniform. His comments had absolutely nothing to do with the people in blue. Mr. Patel has also been accused of mismanaging hostage rescue missions, particularly one in Africa. But numerous national security officials, including General Tata, who was directly involved, have said it is, quote unquote, irresponsible to say Mr. Patel jeopardized the mission and that Mr. Patel, quote, played a large role in the success of the mission, unquote. Mr. Patel has also been accused of having an enemies list. Mr. Patel does not call his book appendix an enemies list, and he said that it is not about political revenge. He believes, as I believe, that those who have abused their positions in government should be called out for breaking the public trust. It's very clear that my Democrat colleagues made their minds up about Mr. Patel long before he was given an opportunity to be heard. And now my colleagues attack Mr. Patel and demand that he come back before this committee to answer for reforms and personnel changes that the Trump administration has begun at the FBI. Of course, it's outrageous, as we all know, to suggest that a nominee should come before the Senate to answer questions for an agency's action that occurred before he gets to be head of that agency. But more importantly, FBI reforms, and yes, even firings, are needed. The Trump administration is cleaning house at the FBI because the FBI is and has been for years infected with political bias and whistleblower retaliation, and I've got a lot to say about that in just a minute. It's long past overdue for the whistleblowers who's been affected by FBI misconduct to be given a voice. So now I'm going to take some time sharing statements from whistleblowers who were retaliated against some of the FBI officials that Trump has recently fired. Now, I'd like to have the White House and my Republican colleagues take note of this, because I think some of these people should be reinstated because of how justly they've been treated. And like you've heard me so many times say, whistleblowers are treated like a skunk at a picnic. And I hope my Democrat colleagues will learn a lesson about how the FBI has previously treated whistleblowers, both under Republican administrations and Democrat administrations, so that we don't have this happening again. One whistleblower said, quote, people like these have harmed the noble mission of the Bureau. They've created turmoil, and their personal agenda has spread throughout the Bureau over the last decade. In service of the country, we should insist on removing them from the FBI, not tomorrow, but right now, end of quote. Remember, he said the last decade. That covers presidents of both parties. A second whistleblower said, quote, Michael Nordwall had oversight and approval authority over Arctic frost, which required a critical assessment of alleged basis for opening an investigation of this magnitude and political significance. The failure to raise an objection, much less critically assess Thibault's motives, alone should be grounds for dismissal, end of quote. And for my Democrat colleagues, you've heard me talk about Thibault for the last 2 years. One of the few people that I ever know that Ray fired for doing things wrong. And I had to point that out to him. Now pay attention to this one. A third FBI whistleblower said, quote, on January 6, 2021, I took leave and went to see the president speak on the ellipse. Later, my wife and I were among a crowd southwest of the Capitol. Even though we were involved in no violence, never set foot on the steps of the leading to the Capitol building, and never entered it, I reported my presence to the FBI after seeing violence in the news reports. The FBI did nothing at first, but more than a year later, suspended my security clearance. Under supervision of Jeff Veltri and Dina Perkins, investigators questioned my coworkers about whether I ever vocalized support for President Trump or objections to COVID-19 vaccine. I was forced to take early retirement to pay bills and have essentially been sidelined from employment opportunities due to the FBI abuse of the clearance system to target me for my political beliefs, end of quote. Now you're going to hear these names, Jeff Veltri and Dina Perkins, crop up here quite often. So I don't know who they are, but they're obviously not very good people to have in the FBI when they take retaliation as they have. A fourth FBI whistleblower and a registered Democrat said, quote, as a security division employee, I witnessed abuses committed against multiple employees by FBI senior leaders, particularly by Jeff Veltri and Dina Perkins. I also saw a security division retaliated against 5 of its own employees for protesting these unlawful practices. Because I spoke out against these abuses, Perkins and Timothy Dunham suspended my security clearance, costing me my job and continuing employment, totaling approximately $700,000 in lost wages and retirement benefits, end of quote. A fifth whistleblower said, quote, although some of my FBI leaders who abused the clearance process, like Dina Perkins and Jeff Veltri, have already left, they weren't alone. Timothy Dunham approved Perkins' wrongdoings and engaged in his own. While most security division employees are fantastic, some FBI leaders still remain within the security and integrity and investigation section who will continue this abuse of the process. From FBI whistleblower Marcus Allen, quote, Jeff Veltri and Dina Perkins caused the suspension of my security clearance because I questioned whether the FBI director was truthful to Congress and whether the FBI was obeying the laws and constitutions in the January 6, 2021 investigations. Their actions left me without pay for 2 years, while other FBI officials prevented me from having other income. Although the FBI ultimately reinstated my clearance and settled my lawsuit, my career at the FBI was over, and the financial and emotional damage to me and my family will never be completely restored. Why should you have to hire a lawyer and sue just because you use your constitutional right of free speech? Another FBI whistleblower said, quote, after I was assigned to review Marcus Allen's security clearance case, I noticed the file was missing relatively. I'm going to start this quote over. After I was assigned to review Marcus Allen's security clearance case, I noticed the file was missing relative communication of Jeff Veltri, who ordered the opening of the case, Dina Perkins, and FBI attorney Tasha Gibbs. Allen was entitled to those communications, which were evidence that his clearance suspension was retaliatory. Shortly after I completed the vast majority of work on the communication recommending Allen's reinstatement, the Allen case was reassigned to another adjudicator, and I was transferred to a different unit, apparently in reprisal for reporting the wrongdoing in the Allen suspension. I soon resigned from the FBI to avoid further retaliation. I believe that Veltri, Perkins, and Gibbs were responsible for retaliating against Allen, and that Giuliani, Arzini, Perkins, and Gibbs were likely responsible for retaliation against me, end of quote. From FBI whistleblower Garrett O'Boyle, quote, I faced retaliation from junior, mid, and senior level, unquote, leaders in the FBI. More than 29 months later, I'm still indefinitely suspended without pay and benefits. Other whistleblowers have since confirmed that the FBI intentionally stranded me in the middle of a move and withheld our possessions to maximize the pain of my suspension. A new era of accountability and true whistleblower protection to the FBI is long overdue. FBI officials like Sean Clark, Sean Fitzgerald, Jeff Berkebile, Dina Perkins, Jeff Veltri, Jennifer Moore, Michael Snyders, Timothy Dunham, and other leadership up to Christopher Wray are responsible for what happened to me and my family, ensuring they no longer work at the FBI isn't retribution, it's responsible leadership. From FBI whistleblower Steve Friend, Jacqueline McGuire was promoted to upper echelons of the FBI after sending federal agents to arrest nonviolent Catholic pro-life protester Mark Houck at gunpoint. As someone who lost my career by blowing the whistle on these kinds of abuses and needlessly risky tactics for cooperative subjects, I was offended by her being rewarded rather than held accountable. Her dismissal is a small step towards ending the FBI's weaponization and should come sooner, end of quote. From FBI whistleblower Mike Zoomer, quote, after witnessing federal prosecutors favor a sexual predator district attorney who used the power of his office to sexually abuse vulnerable women, I reported their wrongdoing to the presiding federal judge. Although the allegations weren't classified, the FBI suspended and later revoked my security clearance. The U.S. attorney responsible for the misconduct was named by President Biden to lead the Department of Justice criminal investigation, and the FBI special agent in charge responsible for the FBI's retaliation against me was promoted to be the third highest FBI official. He soon retired after he harassed a young female subordinate. Meanwhile, I went through an 8-year process to be reinstated, only to have the Biden DOJ affirm the FBI's revocation of my security clearance in December 2024, finalizing my removal. See how removing a security clearance is a tool to retaliate and ruin people professionally. And lastly, I know you're tired of listening to this, so that's why I said, and lastly, from another FBI whistleblower, quote, I've watched the FBI become an institution not, quote unquote, of the people, but of a select few who know the, quote unquote, system and process and use it to their advantage. Those people need to leave. As a whistleblower, I stand ready to help return the FBI to its earlier days of glory and return America's trust in what was an incredible institution, end of quote. Now, how can anybody listen to these statements from the FBI to know that there's a culture that just is not totally in tune with what law enforcement agency ought to do and conclude that everything is okay? These law enforcement agencies are out of control, drunk on power, and blinded by political infection. It's time to force them to recognize they answer to Congress and we the people. And those who retaliated against whistleblowers should be fired full stop by colleagues who think otherwise of protecting these whistleblowers. And I hope this message gets to President Trump. My Democratic colleagues hounded Patel to say he'd stand up to Trump. Well, these brave whistleblowers stood up to the last administration and they suffered retaliation. So why aren't my Democrat colleagues running to defend them and demanding the wrongdoers be held accountable? This administration must hold the bad actors accountable, fire them if necessary, give whistleblowers their security clearance back. President Trump, I hope you hear that. Put them in a position they were in before they had their retaliation. President Trump, I hope you hear that. If you can hire people, you can reinstate people, President Trump. That's part of what this committee ought to be focused on. Solutions to the rampant weaponization and whistleblower retaliation. These are two issues that Kash Patel is perfectly suited to fix because he's lived those issues. Senator Durbin.
Thank you, Chairman Grassley. After reviewing Kash Patel's record and meeting with him, questioning him at this hearing, I'm even more convinced that he has neither the experience, the judgment, nor the temperament to lead the FBI. A little history. 50 years ago, Frank Church led an effort to investigate the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They came up with a sweeping reform and conclusion. Congress passed a law limiting the FBI director to a single term of 10 years, subjecting the appointment to the advice and consent of the Senate. These actions were taken specifically to ensure that FBI director remains apolitical and is shielded from outside influence, and that no FBI director amasses the kind of power that J. Edgar Hoover, the founder of the FBI, exercised when he had wiretaps on Martin Luther King Jr. and other civil rights leaders and branded them as communist. For the last half century, this law has served its purpose. At Mr. Patel's hearing, one of my Republican colleagues suggested that consideration of an FBI director is a, quote, shirts and skins game, quote unquote. That is clearly incorrect if you look at the record. I've served on this committee for more than 20 years during the consideration of 4 FBI director nominations, Bob Mueller twice, Comey, and Wray before this one. Each of these directors was a Republican, and I voted for all of them. Some game of shirts and skins. What it boils down to is this agency should be above politics. What we have just heard from the chairman is an invitation for a political free-for-all if Kash Patel is chosen as the head of this FBI. I will not be surprised when my Republican colleagues again claim that the Democrats have weaponized the FBI, as we've already heard, despite the fact for the last 50 years, every single Senate-confirmed head of the FBI has been a Republican. Even former Chris Wray, former director, has been a frequent target of outrage. My Republican colleagues conveniently never mention that Director Wray is a lifelong Republican, nominated to the position by Republican President Donald Trump, and confirmed to the position, get this, with the unanimous support of Senate Republicans. Unanimous. As a reminder, President Biden kept Director Wray, a Republican appointed by President Trump, in that position. But because he did not do his bidding, President Trump forced Wray out and nominated Mr. Patel, an inexperienced loyalist to the Trump administration. It turns out that Mr. Patel is already seeking retribution on behalf of President Trump, despite his status as a private citizen. As I revealed earlier this week, multiple whistleblowers have disclosed to my staff highly credible information indicating that Mr. Patel, a civilian, is personally directing the ongoing purge of senior law enforcement officials at the FBI. The ramifications of these terminations are dangerous, and they go beyond Mr. Patel's fitness for office. This purge has greatly weakened the FBI's ability to protect the country from national security threats and made America less safe. This week, I invited the head of the organization that represents FBI agents to come to my office and talk to me about the morale at the FBI. 2 women came and visited with me. Both of them had served as FBI agents for long periods of time, one for 22 years and another for 17 years, and they both were proud to tell me their fathers were FBI agents before them. They said to me they have never seen this kind of thing happen in the transition of one president to another when it comes to the FBI. There is only one person, nominally and officially, who is political at the FBI, the director. All the others are professional and career employees. One political person. But now there's been requests from this administration, for example, to produce the names of all of the agents and staff at the FBI who worked on the January 6th insurrection mob that assaulted the Capitol. Think about that for a second. 38,000 employees at the FBI. How many do you think worked on that case? 5,000 names. 5,000 names they want to disclose. It's understandable that these FBI agents are worried. They realize that the people who were engaged in that mob action on the Capitol, many of them were dangerous people, despite the full pardon given to them by Donald Trump. Let me tell you about one of them, just to give you an example. And if you question whether the FBI agents should be reluctant to have their identities and the identities of their families made public, his name was Guy Reffitt. He was the first defendant to stand trial on charges related to January 6. Sentenced to 87 months in prison for bringing a firearm into the Capitol that day. Reffitt's 19-year-old son, Jackson, turned him into law enforcement after the attack. Jackson also indicated that Reffitt had threatened to shoot him personally and his sister Peyton if they reported him to authorities. After receiving a pardon from President Trump, Reffitt attended Kash Patel's Senate Judiciary Committee meeting in this room. He posted on social media the following, and I quote, "Present and in support of Kash Patel, as the leftist commies continue to spew lies, misinformation and disinformation, my man, clean house Kash." We are inviting a political disaster if we put Kash Patel into this job. Can you imagine having worked for the FBI all your life, taking an oath that you're ready to give your life in defense of this country, be involved in all of the assignments that you were assigned to, and then comes a new president, Donald Trump, and wants to see the names of whether you were one of the people who was involved in the January 6th investigation, the largest criminal investigation in the history of the United States. I think this is outrageous. If we have respect for these agents, show it. To invite this political warfare that's been described already this morning is to the detriment of the men and women who are risking their lives for us in this agency. We have a list here of 6 executive assistant directors who have been purged already from the FBI. I asked the FBI agents, has this ever happened before with a new president? No, never happened before. These are top FBI officials who oversaw the FBI's work combating international and domestic terrorism, cybercrime, drug trafficking, and violent crime. In the FBI's long history, this has never happened before. Keep in mind, one political appointee, the director, all others career. The leaders who've been forced out are all career FBI officials who've worked their way up in the ranks and have decades of experience. And that's only the beginning. Acting Director, Deputy Attorney General Emil Bove, apparently acting at Mr. Patel's direction, has asked for a list of FBI personnel who worked on any matters relating to the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. He is the transition leader, or was a transition leader for the Trump administration. Meanwhile, 1,600, including one of the individuals I just described to you, January 6 defendants who were given blanket pardon by Trump are on the loose. Think about that. A man who brought the gun into the Capitol, 87-month sentence, blanket pardon by Donald Trump, and now they wanted full disclosure of the names of the FBI agents who were involved in this case. It is outrageous that these sworn FBI agents, who were simply doing the jobs assigned to them, now fear for their livelihoods and their safety and the safety of their families. It is unacceptable for a nominee with no role in government to personally direct the unjustified, potentially illegal firing of dedicated, nonpartisan FBI officials. And if these allegations are true, Mr. Patel has come dangerously close to perjury before this Senate Judiciary Committee. Why do I say that? During the hearing, when he was asked about possible terminations of the FBI by Senator Booker, Mr. Patel said, "I don't know what's going on right now over there." Mr. Patel seems to be unable to wait for Senate confirmation to carry out his plan of retribution on behalf of President Trump. This is a private citizen, Patel, with no role in government, allegedly directing baseless firings of career public servants, and then misleading this committee about his actions. Given the serious nature of these allegations, I've asked the DOJ Inspector General to investigate. I urge my Republican colleagues to take these allegations seriously. I know you want to be loyal to your president. I know you want to vote for all of his nominations. I know none of you want a call from Elon Musk reminding you what he might do to somebody who votes the wrong way. But this really gets down to the heart of the future of an agency that is critical to the security of this nation. This is not the only time Mr. Patel misled the committee under oath. At his hearing, he implausibly told me he could not recall the name Stu Peters, an anti-Semitic Holocaust denier. Patel, under oath, said, "I can't recall his name." This is simply not credible, considering that Mr. Patel appeared on Mr. Peters' podcast 8 times. Couldn't pick the name out of it. Stu Peters? No, I don't think I know that man. 8 times. And Mr. Peters has since revealed that he and Mr. Patel directly communicate via their personal cell phones, quote, constantly, close quote. Stu Peters? Say the name again? Don't recognize it. Mr. Patel also claimed he didn't have anything to do with the recording of the so-called January 6th prison choir, those who were convicted of assaulting people and trespassing on the United States Capitol on January 6th. Here's what he told Steve Bannon, and I quote, "We got this idea to record the January 6 prisoners who recite the national anthem every night from the D.C. prison. Then we took that to the studio, so we mastered and digitized it." And he said he had nothing to do with it under oath. Mr. Patel has demonstrated a lack of sound judgment by associating with extremist figures like Mr. Peters, who have well-documented histories of racist, anti-Semitic, and conspiratorial statements. But now, somehow, my colleagues on the other side are silent. Mr. Patel clearly lacks the temperament to lead the FBI. Don't take it from me. Read his own words. I wonder if any of my Republican colleagues accepted my invitation to read this book, and I did read it. Government Gangsters. In this book, Mr. Patel published an enemies list of 60 people whom he calls, quote, members of the deep state, whatever the hell that is, and accuses of being, quote, corrupt actors of the first order. This list includes many distinguished public servants, both Democrats and Republicans alike. What they share in common is the misfortune of having crossed paths with Patel. There's one of them I'm going to highlight, and many of the people on the panel know him, Bob Mueller. Bob Mueller is an extraordinary man. Yes, he's a Republican. Yes, I voted for him to be director of the FBI. He finished his college career and enlisted in the Marine Corps to serve in Vietnam. He received a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star for his combat duty. Came back, worked as a prosecutor, worked his way up in the Department of Justice, and became the director of the FBI. He took over just days after 9/11. I worked with him for years. I respect him completely, and we all should respect him, if for nothing else, his service to our country in combat in Vietnam. And now he is on the enemies list of Kash Patel. Mr. Patel gives no quarters when he disagrees with someone. He's called Democrats, quote, vindictive, evil, and vicious. And then there is his social media posts repeatedly attacking Republican senators for not voting right and not following MAGA orthodoxy. During the previous administration, my Republican colleagues were outraged by Biden judicial nominees' social media posts. And they deemed poetry written by a nominee in college 30 years ago as disqualifying him to serve on the bench because it showed, quote, Marxist ideology. 30 years ago, wrote a poem. Be careful. Where is the outrage now for Mr. Patel, who has launched disgusting attacks on everyone from Elon Musk to LeBron James? Mr. Patel has also displayed a startling disdain for the agency he's been nominated to lead. He wants to, quote, shut down the FBI, Hoover Building on day one, reopen it the next day as a museum of the deep state, quote, unquote. He falsely claimed that the FBI was planning January 6th for a year before it happened. His conspiratorial theories just keep bounding out in his book and otherwise. He can't stop. And he's been clear about what he wants to do with the FBI's vast surveillance and investigative powers, saying, quote, we're going to come after the people in the media. Mr. Patel has been open about his plans to dismantle the FBI and seek retribution, and he's already begun that mission as a private citizen, targeting senior FBI officials. Consider for a moment, if he is successful in this nomination, his first meeting of the head of the as head of the FBI with the men and women who are sworn to uphold the law and serve at his direction. Think about the morale in that room in light of what's going on. Mr. Patel's directives have already thrown the Bureau into chaos. Senior executives who collectively have hundreds of years of experience have been forced out. Thousands of line agents across the country are living in fear of losing their jobs simply because they did the job they were assigned to do. How does any of this make America safer? The American people need an FBI director focused on keeping the public safe from terrorism, drug trafficking, and violent crime, not petty personal grievances. I yield.
Thank you, Senator Durbin. Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Let me start by disagreeing with the notion that what took place with respect to the cases against President Trump was weaponization. I know that's the Republican theory of the case, but the other reason why the FBI and the Department of Justice would investigate Trump for crimes is because Trump was doing crimes, and there was adequate predication to pursue investigation of those crimes. And indeed, in every case that I'm aware of in which those cases were allowed to go to judgment, the president was convicted. So we can't allow the weaponization narrative to just remove the notion that the guy was investigated and prosecuted for crimes because he did the crimes. Once you start with the notion that Trump is not a criminal but a victim, you then have to invent the conspiracy that victimized him. And once you've propagated that conspiracy, you then have to find who the conspirators are. So then you have to go after FBI agents and DOJ folks in order to prop up that theory. The way that ended in Soviet Russia was with show trials of the individuals who were allegedly in the conspiracy. The way that ends in Trump's America is with agents and prosecutors forced out in mass purges that may well, as the Ranking Member Durbin has pointed out, been driven by Kash Patel as a private citizen. So starting with that point, there are three reasons why Kash Patel is extremely dangerous. One is all of his wild MAGA behavior. This is a guy whose judgment is beyond questionable. It's appallingly bad. We have a lot of quarrel about whether his enemies list is an enemies list and whether we're smearing the guy by saying that his enemies list is an enemies list. Here's what he said about it. He showed his enemies list and said, "The manhunt starts tomorrow." If they're not your enemies, why would you start a manhunt against them? He called them the criminals themselves and showed a picture of his enemies list. If criminals aren't your enemies, as head of the FBI, who are? He retweeted a video showing him chainsawing the heads off of people on his enemies list. If you're chainsawing the heads off of people, are they not your enemies? So the invention that this is not an enemies list requires people to go into just fantasy land. And these are his own statements. These aren't our accusations. These are Patel's own words. Going after people in the media, impeaching judges who disagree with us, shutting down the FBI Hoover building, on and on and on. This guy is a flagrant extremist with appallingly bad judgment. Second point, we don't know enough about this mischief yet. There are real open questions. We've never in this committee had a person come for a serious senior law enforcement position who had testified in a grand jury criminal matter, and we don't know what he testified about. He's entitled to tell us. That's basic grand jury Rule 6E law. But this side of the committee is completely covering that up. We have absolutely no statement from Patel about what his grand jury testimony was. And he's at liberty to give that to us. He just won't. And Republicans won't tell him to. So he gets away with it. He pled the fifth. You don't get to plead the fifth without a real and genuine concern that you can be prosecuted for a crime. What crime? We're entitled to know. We've never had somebody come through this committee for a high senior law enforcement position who had pled the fifth. He's got the right to do that, of course. We've got the right to know. And by the way, when he exercises the right to do that in a civil proceeding, that entitles the jury to draw the adverse inference that what he is covering up in the civil proceeding with his Fifth Amendment assertion is against his interests. A judge will instruct a jury about that adverse interest, and we're not supposed to draw an adverse interest in this committee when we're not told about his Fifth Amendment assertion. There's all this weird stuff that's come up since about investments in Chinese companies in the Cayman Islands vesting while he will be FBI director. If the guy is supposed to be investigating Chinese intrusion into our intelligence faculties, if we're trying to investigate Chinese fentanyl trafficking into our country, why do we want an FBI director who is somewhere between $1 and $5 million into a Chinese company through a Cayman Islands shell? And then there are the Russia connections. I'll get to those at the end. We don't have to, where everybody's fond of saying these are Democratic smears. Actually, go to the Trump appointees who worked with this guy. What are they warning us? They're warning us, Trump National Security Advisor John Bolton, I didn't think he was qualified. I was forced to hire him. That's some recommendation from a colleague. His deputy, Charles Kupperman. Patel's ideas are ludicrous. He's absolutely unqualified for this job, untrustworthy, an absolute disgrace to even consider an individual of this nature. Definitely you want that on your resume by way of a recommendation from a former supervisor. Attorney General Barr said Patel has virtually no experience that would qualify him to be the deputy director of the FBI, and now he's back as the director of the FBI. And Trump's CIA director, Gina Haspel, threatened to resign rather than allow this guy into her office as her deputy. And if you go beyond the Trump appointees who are warning us about this guy, you can go to the last time he testified in court, which was in Colorado, and here's what the court found about him. That Patel was not a credible witness, that his testimony was illogical, and it was completely devoid of any evidence in the record. Okay, I've been an attorney general, and I've been a United States attorney, and I've put state police troopers on the stand, and I've put FBI agents on the stand. If at the end of a case, a judge made findings like this about a law enforcement witness that I put on the stand, there would be follow-up. I would want an explanation of why this witness was so incredible that findings like that were made by the judge. It would be a significant issue with respect to that witness's continued performance in office. And here's a guy who's been found to be completely incredible by a judge in his testimony, and we're acting as if that's nothing. That's not Democrats. That's a judge in Colorado. So the last thing I'll say is I think we need to begin to prepare ourselves for Trump-Russia 2.0. The Trump-Russia thing was, I'm not going to go back all over it, fully ventilated in the Senate Bipartisan Intelligence Report, in the Mueller report. Trump-Russia was a thing. We stopped talking about it, but Trump kept talking about it and saying it was a hoax. Trump-Russia hoax, Trump-Russia hoax. No, it was not a hoax. It was real. It was there. There's a record. Part of it was bipartisan work. Some of it was done in the House. There was an abundance of evidence about the Trump-Russia connection. And now what are we seeing? We're seeing Patel coming in, who says he wants to wreck the FBI's what he called intel shop, which is the part of the FBI that looks at Russia and does counterintelligence work against Russia. He said that he wants to close out the D.C. office and send everybody out into the field. Well, it's the D.C. office, not the field offices, that do the counterintelligence work. You want to shut it down? You're opening your arms to Russian intelligence operations. You go just across to the Attorney General's office, and there's Attorney General Bondi. What's the first thing she does when she gets in? Closes all the kleptocrature and kleptocracy investigation offices of the Department of Justice. Gee, who were they pursuing? Putin and his oligarchs. You shut down the group that has successfully grabbed assets off Putin's crooked oligarchs. What a signal that is. And then look at Tulsi Gabbard. I'm not going to go through the whole length of her Russia associations, but let's just say that a Russian news media editorial said that her appointment should cause the CIA and the FBI to tremble because she was a friend to Russia. Who defends us against Russian intelligence operations and Russia's criminal operations in the United States? It's the FBI, it's the Department of Justice, and it's our intelligence community. The people in charge of each one have sent powerful signals that they are shutting down our defenses when it comes to Russia. And we're about to head to the Munich Security Conference, where we are seeing Mr. Art of the Deal and his operatives giving away every piece of leverage that we have over Putin with respect to Ukraine. It is unilateral disarmament to throw Ukraine under the bus and give Putin what he wants. So mark my words. This Patel guy will come back to haunt you. Every piece of evidence shows that, and it is not Democrat evidence. It's his own words, it's his own colleagues, and it's judges evaluating his credibility. And Trump-Russia is going to come roaring back, if it's not already back. We should be on our guard about this nominee, and we should be on our guard about Trump-Russia. Thank you, Chairman.
Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I oppose the confirmation of Kash Patel to serve as the next director of the FBI. The director of the FBI leads our nation's most important law enforcement agency, made up of more than 38,000 employees. I have tremendous respect for the men and women of the FBI. They take on violent crime. They get fentanyl off our streets. In our state, they have investigated incredibly complex matters, including a case a few years back that was the biggest white-collar case outside of Madoff for years. They have done such a good job, and we are proud of them. I have supported FBI directors under Republican presidents, including President Trump's last nominee, and Democratic presidents. The nonpartisan career public servants at the FBI risk their lives to keep us safe. Their motto, FBI, fidelity, bravery, and integrity. And they deserve a director who respects the work that they do and who embodies the core values of the FBI. That, unfortunately, is not Kash Patel. Let's start with fidelity. A director's loyalty to the American people, the Constitution, and the rule of law is paramount. But Mr. Patel made it abundantly clear that he is loyal to the president, and that is his calls for retribution. When you look back at Mr. Patel's writings, at his interviews, at what he has done in his life, that his focus is the loyalty to the president and not to the people of this country. Mr. Patel has threatened the president's critics. As he said, I quote his words, not just in the government, but in the media, end quote. On one podcast in December 2023, he said, and I quote, "We're going to come after you, whether it's criminally or civilly." On a podcast just last August, I know sometimes our colleagues, we have writings or we have interviews of people that are 10, 15 years ago. These are all recent. Just this August, he said, when Trump wins in 2024 and is in power in 2025, we can prosecute them, referring to Justice Department officials. And when I asked him about it in my written questions, he replied about that comment, he replied that, quote, he made those comments in a television interview, not in a court of law or before the committee, as if the venue minimizes the threat. And in fact, at his hearing before this committee, he had opportunity to walk back that threat and others. He chose not to. Nor did he try to explain his so-called deep state list of former government officials, including many Republicans who served in the last Trump administration, including Attorney General Barr, who Republicans on this committee have repeatedly commended for his service. But he is on, Barr is on, Kash Patel's deep state list. He also criticized former CIA Director Gina Haspel, numerous elected officials, including the former head of Veterans Affairs, Dennis McDonough. I remind our colleagues on the other side of the aisle that Bill Barr said about Patel this: Patel has virtually no experience that would qualify him to serve at the highest level of the world's preeminent law enforcement agency. And his appointment to the FBI, he said a few years back when Patel was being considered for another job in the FBI, his appointment to the FBI would only happen, Barr's words, over his dead body. Then CIA Director Gina Haspel also threatened to resign to stop Patel from being her deputy. These and many others who have criticized him over time are people who have served our country. I didn't always agree with some of them. Some are Democrats, some are Republicans. But they have repeatedly said the same thing, that he should not be running the FBI. And we know what Mr. Patel wants to do with the people on that list because he already told us. On another podcast episode, he said the people on his list need to go to prison. That is a shocking statement from someone who may be the next head of the FBI. And it's not just government officials, but the press as well. As you know, Mr. Chairman, I care deeply about an independent press and the First Amendment. Mr. Patel, though, has referred to the media as, quote, the most powerful enemy the United States has ever seen. He didn't even say that one on a podcast. He said it in a speech at the Conservative Political Action Conference on February 23rd, 2024. Think about that. He is saying that the press, with many here standing up for the First Amendment, he's saying the press is the most powerful enemy the United States has ever had. Not China, not Russia, not Iran, not terrorists, but he says the most powerful enemy is the press. And I would ask my colleagues how they can justify voting for this man who would say such a thing as the director of the FBI that constantly deals with domestic threats that come from afar and come from people who are, in fact, affiliated with terrorist groups in these countries. How do we know Mr. Patel will carry out the revenge agenda? Well, it is already occurring. At his hearing, Mr. Patel did say, quote, all FBI employees will be protected against political retribution. And yet, mere hours after those remarks, the administration forced out 8 of the Bureau's most senior career public servants who serve in nonpartisan roles. One day later, an email was sent to FBI employees requesting a list of everyone who had worked on January 6 cases to determine whether any additional personnel actions are necessary. That's their quote. Think about this. Thousands of agents, maybe people who had just joined the FBI, are asked to work on a case. It happens all the time. Anyone in a workplace knows what I am talking about. But in this case, if you are affiliated with any kind of case that Mr. Patel did not like in the past, well, then you need to be on some list. They get assigned to a case because a violent felony occurred on January 6th. Everyone in this room that was there know exactly what I'm talking about. People assaulted police officers. And now those agents who were simply doing their job find themselves on a list for personnel action. That is not right. That will not make Americans safe, and that will destroy the Federal Bureau of Investigation. This isn't fidelity to the Constitution. This isn't fidelity to the rule of law and impartial law enforcement. It is an affront to it. That's fidelity. Second, bravery. Let's talk about bravery. Now, we all know that Capitol Police showed bravery far and above the call of duty on January 6, 2021. Every one of the members of this committee have talked about the fact that the police officers protected us and were brave. But rather than recognize the officers' bravery, Mr. Patel accused those who testified, officers, on January 6, of lying. When asked if Capitol Police officers told the truth in the January 6 committee hearings, Mr. Patel said, and I quote, no, and lying under oath is a federal offense and they should be investigated for it. Yet he claimed at his hearing that this wasn't accurate. We have it on tape. It's literally on YouTube, on the Joe Pack Show, 5/29/2024 at minute 2:57. You know who else exemplifies bravery? The men and women at the FBI who every day put their lives on the line and keep us safe. What does Kash Patel think of these public servants? He wrote that, again, I quote, the FBI has become so thoroughly compromised that it will remain a threat to the people unless drastic measures are taken, end quote. He has called the men and women who keep us safe, quote, utterly corrupt, and called for a, quote, comprehensive housekeeping, end quote, of the FBI. That's from his book, page 73 and page 85. He also called for shutting down the FBI headquarters, and you know what happens at that headquarters. This is where they coordinate the investigations of complex cases, including terrorism and cyber crimes. Happened on the Sean Ryan Show, 9/2/2024. What are the facts? Under Christopher Wray's leadership, who was a Trump appointee, the morale of the agents and personnel at the FBI has improved significantly. 3 times as many people are applying to the FBI under Christopher Wray's leadership and during his term than when he started. 3 times the number. How can you say there's some horrible corruption? People actually want to go work there. They want to be an FBI agent. They think that it is a job of public service, that is an honorable job. I don't think the FBI is a threat to the people or utterly corrupt, as Kash Patel has said, and I actually don't think our colleagues on the Republican side of the aisle believe this either. I think that they admire the people that work at the FBI. The men and women of the FBI show us every day what it means to embody bravery, and now we need to show them that we can be brave as well and tell the president no. And if our colleagues on the Republican side on this committee will not join us in just saying no one time to the president, maybe some of them will join us in the greater Senate body on the floor. So that brings us to integrity. FBI. The FBI runs on facts. It runs on truth. Without truth, the whole system breaks down. And Mr. Patel in his hearing made abundantly clear why this nation should be so concerned about putting someone in this job for whom there is such a lack of trust. Mr. Patel did not even have the integrity to stand by his own words to this committee. His own words. Repeatedly, I asked about these statements. Own them, man. Just say, yeah, I said it. I believe that. I believe we should shut down the FBI headquarters. I believe they're all corrupt. These are things that he has said, not 10 years ago, not when he was a student, in the last year. Instead of disavowing or providing the explanations for reckless past statements, Kash Patel repeatedly misled this committee, dodged questions, and claimed ignorance, despite the fact that all of his statements are on the record for all of us to see. How can we have an FBI director that doesn't even remember what he said 6 months ago? The director of our nation's most powerful law enforcement agency must be forthright and trustworthy. He must follow the facts and carefully analyze evidence before drawing conclusions. Mr. Patel has made clear that his allegiance is not to the truth. He has put ideology and his loyalty to Donald Trump ahead of the facts. Mr. Chairman, independence of the FBI from the White House is critical. The FBI director has immense power to direct surveillance, investigate American citizens, and recommend when charges be brought. The next director's loyalty must be to the people and not the president. And even if someone was to put in someone who is their friend, which has happened in these jobs in the past, why would you pick this person who has repeatedly maligned the agents that work at the FBI? Why would you pick someone who in the last year decided to make money off of hawking a supplement that he claimed would reverse the effects of the COVID vaccine? Why would you put someone in place that thinks it's fun to say you should close down the headquarters and has put together a list of people that he hates, that he says he wants to take revenge on? Why would you pick that person of all the people you could pick for this office that maybe you even know or you've worked with before? But Donald Trump picked this person, and I think we know why. The fact is, federal law enforcement and the American people deserve a director who embodies the Bureau's model: fidelity, bravery, integrity. The men and the women of the FBI deserve better than this nominee, and I ask our Republican colleagues to stand up for the agents that work there and to stand up and say no once.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm speaking today on why I will vote against Kash Patel as the nominee to be director of the FBI. The FBI, as my colleagues have spoken to at length, is one of the world's most important, powerful, and respected law enforcement agencies. and the tens of thousands of agents who serve us all across our nation are a key bulwark against terrorism, against extremism, against crimes that range from the theft of intellectual property to interstate gangs that carry out human trafficking or murder for hire. The FBI is an absolutely critical part of our nation's security, and it rests on trust. It rests on having an independent leader. Back to the dark days of J. Edgar Hoover being a politically connected and compromised FBI leader, in the decades since his tenure ended, we have engaged in a disciplined, balanced, bipartisan process to confirm FBI directors for long terms, 10-year terms. And I have voted for Republican nominees put forward by Republican presidents. We need, as director of the FBI, someone who will stand up for the men and women of this incredible law enforcement agency. And in his testimony before this committee and in his comments and actions before coming in front of this committee, Kash Patel has shown that he is not that leader. He is already actively undermining the bureau he seeks to lead. As someone who is the co-chair of the Law Enforcement Caucus and who spent years leading, supervising, responsible for the second largest law enforcement agency in my state, I see in Mr. Patel an alarming willingness to do the bidding of a vengeful White House. As you heard from my colleague, Senator Durbin, whistleblowers are alleging that he has already helped orchestrate the purge of the most senior leadership of the FBI, as well as those agents who were simply doing their job as assigned to them to carry out January 6th investigations. This purge is only the start of what I fear is about to come. The FBI has demanded that, the administration has demanded that the FBI turn over a list of its newest recruits and employees, has pushed out the head of the Washington field office and other top leadership, and is giving roles to folks who lack the relevant professional experience. The FBI needs independence, but Mr. Patel told me when I asked him that he believes the FBI works for the White House. I asked that same question of several other recent nominees, and they gave the correct answer, that federal law enforcement, whether the Department of Justice or the FBI, works for the Constitution and the American people. The FBI doesn't work for the White House. It works for all of us. Attorney General Pam Bondi got that question right. Todd Blanche and Gail Slater got that question right in their hearing yesterday. How is it that Kash Patel flunked that easiest and most central question? Not just to whom do you report, but for whom do you serve? As I said, we've seen what a dark chapter can be when the FBI is led by someone who is politically connected and by whom he politically corrupts the goals and purpose of the FBI, and I fear that we are heading into one of those chapters again. As I questioned him during his confirmation, I asked Mr. Patel if he, like his predecessors, would be willing to resign rather than take an unconstitutional or illegal action if ordered by the president. He refused to answer that question. I asked him if he would resign if President Trump asked him to go after a political enemy, and he refused to answer that question. I asked him if he would resign if the president asked him to block an investigation due to political considerations, and he refused to answer. These are questions that I asked of Directors Comey and Wray, and that they answered. If Patel refuses to answer these simple questions, questions that I think are rooted in recent developments and in his repeated public statements, questions that his predecessors have answered clearly, forcefully, and appropriately, how can we trust him to lead the FBI? I implore my Republican colleagues to reconsider the step I believe they are about to take to confirm this man to lead one of our most important elements of our law enforcement community. Around the world, our security depends on trust and reliability, and the national security role of the FBI director, the ways in which our FBI is critical to the work of our intelligence community and our military and others overseas as they work to keep us safe, cannot be overlooked. The men and women of the FBI deserve better than Kash Patel. To lead an agency whose watchwords are fidelity, bravery, and integrity, we need someone who has demonstrated their commitment to all three. Americans deserve better than Kash Patel. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator
Thank you.
Oh,
Senator Moody.
well, I was told no Republicans wanted to talk, and then I was told, so you're next then, go ahead.
We have a letter here. Letter.
Oh, yeah, and Senator Urban, go ahead, and then I'm going to call on Senator from Connecticut.
I'd like to enter into the record this letter of opposition of Mr. Patel from the Society for the Rule of Law Institute. They describe themselves as a group of conservative lawyers and jurists who have served at the highest levels of government in previous Republican administration. They include Judge Michael Luttig and Peter Kiesler, a co-founder of the Federalist Society and acting Attorney General during George W. Bush's administration.
Yeah. Without objection, it will be placed on the record. No objection heard. Go ahead, Senator from Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to begin on a positive note and take advantage of the chairman's reference to whistleblowers and our mutual support over the years for them. I hope that the chairman will join me, along with other members of the committee, when we introduce, or I should say reintroduce, the Congressional Whistleblower Protection Act. This measure would expand the protections that are afforded to whistleblowers at a time when we've never needed them more. And I'm going to reintroduce it, I hope, with the support of my colleagues on the committee who have joined me previously, Senators Hirono, Klobuchar, Padilla, and Whitehouse, as well as other colleagues such as Cortez Masto, Wyden, Markey, and Tammy Baldwin. This measure is an important one, and I hope that the chairman will join me, because he has been a champion in the past of whistleblower protection, and the amount of protection must be expanded so that these truth tellers will have the safeguards needed to assure them that there will be no retaliation against them. And on that note, I want to begin in a way personally to talk about the FBI. First of all, just to say thank you to all of the FBI agents. There are 17,000 special agents out there right now, a total of 38,000 civil servants in the FBI. They are probably not listening to what we're saying here, because they are looking into international and domestic terrorism, cyber criminal syndicates, foreign espionage, organized criminal enterprises, including drug cartels, sexual exploitation, and human trafficking. Now, I have not been without criticism of the FBI. And the chairman has said that there is a need for reform. I'm betting that members of the FBI would join in saying there's always room for improvement, but it should not be by someone who vilifies the FBI, as Kash Patel has done. He has said about the FBI that it is a powerful and cunning part of the deep state. Someone who begins with that kind of antagonism and hostility to the FBI will not be able to engage in positive and constructive reform. I've worked with agents of the FBI since I was U.S. Attorney, and I'll never forget the agent who sat with me at counsel table as I tried my first criminal case, practically carrying me through the presentation of evidence and the rules of federal procedure, which he knew as well as I did. The FBI is a premier law enforcement institution for our country, and we should seek to enhance it and improve it, but not to slash and trash it, which is what Kash Patel seems to want to do. A lot has been mentioned about what Kash Patel refused to answer. But I want to go to what he very clearly did answer, which is he committed, in response to my question, that there would be no retribution against any FBI agent, that there would be no mass firing, and no purging of leadership. And now we have reliable information from whistleblowers submitted in a letter by Senator Durbin to the chairman that, in fact, he has been covertly and personally directing a purge of senior leadership and other non-political agents simply because they were assigned to investigate criminal wrongdoing. In direct contradiction of the commitments he made to us, not just to me, it was my question, but to this committee. And that is one of the reasons why I have urged that the chairman call him back, give him a chance to explain that kind of contradiction. What we're left with is a record that shows that he, in effect, wants to turn the FBI into a sycophantic goon squad that would crush political opposition, go after an enemies list. Of course, he calls them government gangsters, not an enemies list. But let me warn members of this committee who are critical of Kash Patel, we will be on that list. And he has the power to investigate anyone who is critical of him. He said there should be a manhunt for those government gangsters. He's telegraphed very clearly how he would use the FBI, and the more so if he is independent of the White House and of the Department of Justice, as clearly he envisions his role to be. He will be an unrestrained, unguided missile against the integrity of the Department of Justice and our justice system. The work of the FBI is essential to judgment and integrity. Kash Patel lacks those two key qualities. He is trafficked in conspiracy theories. He agrees with, quote, a lot of what QAnon says. He engages in election denialism, refusing to say President Biden won the 2020 election. He's even suggested that the FBI planned the January 6th insurrection and attack on the Capitol. He has glorified the January 6th rioters, calling them political prisoners, even the rioters who attacked Capitol Police. He produced a song with the so-called J6 choir. Those were individuals in prison for having attacked police officers. He tried to deny that he had produced the song at his nomination hearing in response to my question, saying, quote, I didn't have anything to do with the recording, end quote. But in response to my questions for the record, he acknowledged that he is one of the producers of the song. He couldn't have denied it because he boasted about it on a podcast. How could he have nothing to do with the recording if he's one of the producers? Let's just be very direct. He was less than truthful to this committee about his role because he knew that his actions amplifying and glorifying the cause of violent criminals who attack police would be an embarrassing obstacle to his confirmation. Only one of the ways that he experienced a confirmation conversion. And looking at the members of that J6 choir, you can well understand why he wanted to disavow any connection with them. Julian Cater, who pepper sprayed the U.S. Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick, who died the next day, Ryan Nichols, who pushed the crowd against officers defending a door to the Capitol and sprayed officers with pepper spray, James McGrew, who pushed and struck officers and launched a handrail at them. Political prisoners? Worthy of glorification? Not by the future director of the FBI, certainly. And Kash Patel has certainly shown that he is vindictive, focusing on seeking revenge rather than keeping America safe. That enemies list is only one of the ways that he may well seek retribution against his opponents. And going after President Trump's political enemies is clearly on this administration's agenda, indeed a priority. Just look at what Pam Bondi did on day one. She ordered the creation of a so-called weaponization working group, a weaponization working group, and specifically named people who would be investigated. Just coincidentally, Jack Smith, Letitia James, Alvin Bragg. They've led legitimate prosecutions and lawsuits against Donald Trump. That's the true weaponization of DOJ and the FBI, and something that must be stopped right away. And now is the time to do it with this nomination, to stop retribution and revenge in the Department of Justice as a priority and a modus operandi, and to send a message that it won't be tolerated. Kash Patel is out for himself, even if it means putting other people's lives in danger. Whistleblowers have said that Kash Patel broke protocol during a hostage rescue mission, leaking details to the press before the hostages were safe in American custody. And during a different hostage rescue mission, former Defense Secretary Mark Esper and said Kash Patel lied about receiving permission from the Nigerian government to enter their airspace. This kind of carelessness could have caused those Navy SEAL hostage rescuers to be shot down. He is not to be trusted with the nation's most important secrets or with the most important law enforcement agency of our nation. Kash Patel pled the Fifth in a case about Donald Trump's handling of classified documents. He's entitled to plead the Fifth Amendment. He eventually testified after prosecutors granted him limited immunity. He's not entitled to deny us the truth of what he told the grand jury as a part of this confirmation proceeding. He had the ability, legal and physical, to tell us what he told the grand jury. We all know, all of us who have prosecuted, that grand jury witnesses are told you can talk about it if you wish. Sometimes they're discouraged from talking about their testimony, but they have the legal right to do so. He had the legal right to tell us about his testimony, but he refused to do it. And he aided us only marginally in seeking that grand jury testimony, which I still feel we need to see, along with the second volume of the Jack Smith report. I want to close by saying that we have a pretty good idea of what the outcome will be today. And I am appalled that my Republican colleagues are prepared to confirm a man so publicly hostile to the agency, its people, its goals, its mission that he intends to lead. We have a responsibility here. Willful ignorance and support of Kash Patel will turn the FBI potentially into a sycophantic goon squad ready to crush political opposition instead of the independent, law enforcement agency that the nation needs and deserves. These votes will haunt my Republican colleagues. They will come back to haunt them when Kash Patel does even a fraction of what we have warned about his doing, and the American people should hold them accountable. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the time today to speak in favor of Kash Patel. As I've listened to my Democratic colleagues and their comments this morning, you can hear the anger and the displeasure with having Kash Patel before us. But I think it's important to realize why Kash Patel is there and why President Trump chose to nominate Kash Patel. The American people are sick and tired of 2 tiers of access, 2 tiers of treatment, and 2 tiers of justice. And during the Biden years, this was writ large in the actions of the DOJ and the FBI. We have all seen it. And while my colleagues may be upset for today, I think it's important to note that they sat silently while you had parents and people of faith and so many that were being confronted. And this happened over and over and over. So I know they're trying to stall and obstruct, but it is important to note that the American people on November 5th voted to see change. They want transparency and accountability. They want the end of 2 tiers of justice. And they want to restore faith in our American institutions. Now, Pam Bondi, who is our Attorney General, has been mentioned several times this morning. She is going about aggressively restoring confidence and sending that message that the rule of law matters. The rule of law matters. And there is an expectation that people will abide by the rule of law. And Kash Patel will work with her in restoring that confidence, that rule of law, rooting out the 2-tier system of justice that the American people have witnessed. Now, when Mr. Patel was before us, before I started my questioning, I asked him a question that came from listening to my Democratic colleagues as they were questioning him. And it was, why do the Democrats fear him? Why do they fear him? And I think the answer is so very apparent. They fear him because, yes, indeed, he is out of the box. They fear him because of what he knows about Russia collusion, what he knows about some of the activity that has taken place. And they fear him because he is going to return the FBI to its core mission, investigating violent crimes and keeping our nation safe. Now, I'm pleased that he's going to focus on violent crime. We know that under President Trump, violent crime was down 17%. This is important to us in Tennessee. In Memphis, we have had quite an issue with violent crime, much of it caused by a lack of attention to prosecuting some of these gang members. There is a Soros-backed DA in Memphis that will not push these cases through. But violent crime under Joe Biden was up 43% in his first year. It is imperative that the FBI go back to investigating these crimes and go back to the Trump policy of investigating and prosecuting these criminals and bringing that transparency back to the justice system. So I'm so pleased that we're moving forward with him today. I'm also pleased, Mr. Chairman, that he is going to work with me to make certain we know who all was involved with Jeffrey Epstein in building out this international sex trafficking ring. This is information we have sought. It is information we have not been able to get. And as the next FBI director, I have no doubt that he is going to work with us to end this scourge of human and sex trafficking in the United States. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't think the American people were up in arms about purging the Department of Justice or the FBI. I don't think they were up in arms wanting a stop to or freeze to federal grants to states. I don't think they were up in arms calling for the NIH to take action that will result in the halting of medical research. No, what they were up in arms was, let's lower the price of food, milk, bread. They're still waiting. So here we are, Mr. Chairman, talking about the nomination of Kash Patel. This man has so many red flags about why it is completely inappropriate to have him as the head of one of our most important law enforcement agencies that it makes your head spin. One thing is very clear about Kash Patel. He has 100% loyalty to Trump. That is the most critical thing for President Trump. We are at a crisis point, and this committee, if it plans to conduct any oversight, it must do so now. And here's what's happening at the FBI. Dozens of senior career FBI and DOJ employees have been purged. More to come. 5,000 names of agents and personnel who worked on January 6 matters. Their names are there. What is supposed to happen to these people? I don't think they're going to get commended for their work on January 6th. So hundreds or thousands of line prosecutors and FBI special agents and analysts may be purged. Make no mistake, our nation is under constant threat, both foreign and domestic. And purging hardworking and dedicated civil servants does nothing to make us safe. So what is happening with the FBI and DOJ is they've turned inward. Rather than focusing on potential attacks, hacks, or violent criminal enterprises, we have a DOJ and FBI that has been turned inward on themselves. Attorney General Bondi's announcement to weaponize in creating a weaponization working group last week only continues this trend. Through this working group, she is doing what she told us she would not do, and that is, we asked her, are you going to start investigating the investigators, prosecuting the prosecutors? What is this weaponization working group supposed to be doing but investigating the investigators and prosecuting the prosecutors, turning inward on itself rather than protecting this country from external dangers? I fear what a DOJ and FBI focused inward on themselves means for the safety and security of our nation. Not much. Which brings me to Mr. Patel. He is not the man to answer the many challenges of the moment. Mr. Patel spent his nomination hearing avoiding every hard question. I asked him if he would investigate people on his 60-person deep state list. He would not say no. Mr. Chairman, we are sitting here continuing to point out all the red flags on this person. We Democrats are going to continue to raise the red flags on this person, and at some point, I'm hoping that maybe we'll come to a decency moment from my Republican colleagues. Continuing, I asked him if he profited from selling supplements to detox the COVID-19 vaccines. He did not answer. I asked him if Donald Trump lost the 2020 election. He would not answer. He claimed not to know an anti-Semitic extremist named Stu Peters, despite appearing 8 times on his podcast. See, the fact that he doesn't even answer, remember, whatever, it makes me think that he thinks coming before this committee under oath is something that he could just ignore with no consequences. And apparently that is the road we're on. And he tried to claim no involvement with the January 6th choir, despite promoting them and hawking their merchandise for years. And he was unwilling to provide any details about his grand jury testimony he was compelled to give after taking the fifth. People who take the fifth are using it to protect themselves from self-incrimination. Of course, Mr. Patel has the same right as any American to plead the fifth, but we have an equal right to ask him, as the nominee for FBI director, no less, why he did so, and to learn what he ultimately testified. The one thing Mr. Patel did testify to in response to a question from Senator Booker, I thank Senator Booker for asking his question about whether he was, quote, aware of any plans or discussions to punish FBI agents or personnel associated with Trump investigations, and was whether he said he was not aware of that, but we note that in fact he had an awareness, and in fact he's proceeding to purge the FBI. He's not even the director. I join my colleagues in once again calling for us to actually get the answers from Mr. Patel. The American people deserve to know where he's coming from. This is a person who's going to use the FBI for his own purposes. He will abuse his power in the FBI, and we have had my colleagues say that we will regret the day that we voted for him. We should be regretting it right at this moment. And we should be calling him back so that the American people can find out what it is that this man plans to do as he intends to very clearly abuse his power at the FBI, all for his own ends and for that of the president, to which he is 100% loyal. That is his biggest qualification to be FBI director, which is not much in my view. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Speak, just so everybody knows, we're planning to vote at 11, and they're going to hold. They said they'd hold the vote open, at least for me. So I assume that's everybody, so that you can all be here. So I don't know whether it's after Moody gets done or Booker gets done, but if we're all here, I don't want to interrupt somebody's speech, but. So if you want to vote a little bit earlier, or just say, or let me interrupt you, whatever the case might be, just think about that. Go ahead, Senator Moody.
Yes, Chair, thank you so much. And I had planned to come today and vote in support of the nominee, but I feel it incumbent upon me, as I've heard speaker after speaker talk about and presume to speak for the rank and file FBI agents across this nation. As someone who has worked hand in hand as a federal prosecutor, myself, as someone who has been a state attorney general, and had to work with and then ultimately sue the FBI when they refused to work with us on the second assassination attempt, and as someone who has married a rank and file federal agent and witnessed firsthand how they have taken what we have seen over the last 4 years, I think it's incumbent upon me to say no one here, including myself, can speak for the rank and file FBI, but what I can say is watching what has happened over the last 4 years and watching the legal system being used to go after political adversaries, the rank and file want to get back to doing their jobs of going after multi-jurisdictional criminals, of working hand in hand with state and law enforcement, of bringing to bear the promise of a country and a free people living under a rule of law that is effectually enforced. And I have to say, I disagree with many people who have said that the morale of FBI will go down if this nominee is confirmed. In fact, I believe quite the opposite. I believe they are ready to stand up and fight and get back to work on mission-critical cases, and that morale will, in fact, go up. I have heard that Kash Patel is out for himself. If that is true, he is out for himself as an American, as someone who believes in the promise of this country, of what its agencies have been created to ensure, and that is to protect the people and their rights, the autonomy of our states. And I believe he will bring to bear that passion and enthusiasm and love of country as the FBI director. I have heard one of my colleagues say, "Why would you pick this person?" and quoted all kinds of things that he has said. Indeed, he is passionate in his love and his demonstration of love for this country. And maybe that is because he has served as a federal prosecutor and a public defender and a chief of staff for the Secretary of Defense and a deputy assistant to the president and senior director for counterterrorism on the National Security Council and as principal deputy to the acting director on national intelligence. Maybe it is through all those roles he has seen what this country has the ability to do to protect its people, and it has seen agencies go down the wrong path. He has said that he thinks that there should be less agents in Washington and more in the field doing their jobs. I think we could all agree with that. And the way he said it might not have been exactly the way we wanted to hear it, but that is what he means. That is what he means. And why pick this person? Because he does have that experience. I've heard questioned his experience. Well, he might not have served in the upper echelons of the FBI, but aren't we asking this agency to set a new course? Don't we want a non-traditional candidate at this moment in time with extensive federal experience? I also heard that it is concerning that those that were at the Capitol on January 6th, and I'm going to quote one of the colleagues who said they were on the loose, and that was concerning. I cannot tell you how many people are on the loose in this country right now that have surged into the country under the last administration. They are prior criminals or indeed have intent to do our country harm. They are on the loose right now because of the last administration. And you have to have an FBI director that is focused and targeted in attention to make sure that those individuals are sought after and rounded up. Indeed, we have DAs, mayors, commissioners, governors that don't care about the rule of law and have allowed crime to explode. So you have to have an FBI director that will fill that gap. You have to have an FBI director that understands that one of their missions is transnational criminal organizations and that the FBI has indeed the jurisdiction to go after those folks. You used the word and the description skunk at a picnic, that is how whistleblowers are treated. To some extent, when these new leaders get into these agencies and they're coming in with an objective view, a fresh perspective, wanting to do right by this country, it may be there are people in those agencies that need to scatter, that need to leave. If they have lost focus of the mission of the agency, if they have lost focus on who they are serving, this country and its people, they do need to go. And any director or any head of agency that we confirm as a Senate needs to go into those positions with that in mind. And I believe that is why Kash Patel will be confirmed by the Senate.
I'm just trying to see, are you encouraging me to talk longer? Because that's never happened in this committee before. I will try to go as quickly as possible. And just say that this is one of the more perplexing nominees for me personally. I've seen the pendulum swing back and forth in this committee now over 11 years. I've seen my colleagues on the other side of the aisle rightfully take up a politically charged tweet about a nominee, whether it's for the bench or for significant offices like this one, as have we. I've seen back and forth, but I've just never seen something like this for a candidate, and I'm surprised that there's not more people who are calling some of this out in the most objective way possible. I do not understand how we're moving forward at this point. It seems like we are. It seems like it's a fait accompli, as I was just told the vote is coming. But I just want to go through some of the things that, to me, are sort of stunning that we are dealing with. First and foremost, this idea of FBI employees, these incredible agents that we all respect, that were involved in a lawful investigation of criminal violations of federal law, or that federal law that was protecting us and our national security, that these folks are being targeted. And we know that is happening. I asked Mr. Patel if he knew of any plans to punish or retaliate against FBI agents and employees who worked on cases that President Trump didn't like. He claimed he didn't, but he should not be really believed, not only because this is a history of lying that we've seen, but because the facts that we've been presented as a committee suggest different. The timing of the FBI purges, moments after the hearing we had, to me seems like an obvious implication upon this nominee. Ranking Member Durbin uncovered compelling evidence that Patel didn't just know about the FBI's plans to fire agents who were doing their job as directed, but that Patel not only knew about it, but that he directed the purge as an outside citizen. And if that's true, Mr. Patel has perjured himself before this committee, something I believe we would take very seriously. His trustworthiness is evident in his failure to disclose his work on behalf of the Embassy of Qatar to this committee. That is stunning. Work for which he possibly broke the law when he didn't file as a foreign agent. These are entanglements that this committee should take seriously, that we should investigate before moving forward. The financial disclosures we received after our hearing that we did not have a chance to ask him about show that Mr. Patel actually enriched himself by doing work for groups linked to Russia and China, foreign adversaries of our nation. I can't believe I need to say this, that as if it may be a question, but at a bare minimum, our FBI director should not have conflicts of interest with the Chinese Communist Party and Vladimir Putin, and we should have had a chance to ask him about that in open committee. That is just the most basic due diligence. Look, everything Mr. Patel has ever written and said, so much of, what he's written and said demonstrates that he is somebody that goes against the idea of integrity and independence that the FBI wants. He has gone far, as my colleagues have said, posting the most outrageous politically charged things. I'm disbelief that of all the incredible people that could run this agency, that this is somebody that we would pick. But my concerns really have to do about Mr. Patel's testimony before this committee. No one can claim surprise when he does exactly what he's promised to do in a lot of these politically charged writings. We have credible evidence that he is already enacting this idea of revenge against FBI agents who Mr. Trump does not like. We have credible evidence that he committed perjury when he told this committee that he wasn't aware of these plans to fire FBI personnel. He later changed his answer when answering the committee's questions for the record. Suddenly he said he went from I don't know to I don't recall whether he plans to fire FBI personnel. And this was what he was saying over and over again. He does not recall. I don't recall. Not long ago, the fact that he lied about not knowing a white nationalist podcaster when he appeared on his podcast, not one time, not 3 times, not 5 times, but he appeared on his podcast 8 times. Yet he said he did not know who this person was or did not remember. This, to me, is a continued pattern that is disqualifying. It would be, to me, something all of our colleagues in this room would say, hey, man, you're not being straight, honest with this committee. Listen, lies like this are misleading and dishonest, especially with an institution that has a reputation for that kind of integrity. His refusals to share what he said before the grand jury is another example of, to me, unacceptable non-answering. His case about handling sensitive national security documents. It's the kind of information FBI directors are responsible for safeguarding. He played a role in that. He spoke before a grand jury. His testimony should be something shared with this committee. And his alarming bad memory about what he testified, to me, is just incredible. When asked whether he discussed with anyone the firing of the Assistant Director of Counterterrorism, he said, not that I recall. Did you know that the FBI officials and rank-and-file agents would be fired before he testified? Not that I recall. Were you aware of the review of FBI personnel who worked on January 6 cases? Not that I recall. Can anyone with a straight face sit here and say that that is an answer, that he is not misleading this committee? This is unbelievable if he doesn't recall that. In fact, his inability to recall such information, to me, speaks against his qualifications for a job if he's not recalling things of such importance. This committee should ask for better from this, from any nominee, from a Democrat or Republican president. This is stunning to me. We are here to serve the American people and their interest. This person has obfuscated, has lied, has shown an utter lack of character and straightforwardness with this committee. It is just obvious to me, of all the people that this president has nominated, I voted for many of them, this stands apart from what this committee should demand from anyone coming before it. I appreciate the desire to defer to a president on their nominees. This is why I have voted for many of Mr. Trump's nominees in this time that he has become elected president. But it is our constitutional duty to ensure that the president's nominees are fit for public office. This vote should not boil down to partisanship. It should really be about the objective understanding of someone who has performed and testified in this manner should be allowed to ascend without further questioning, further investigation of some of these issues that I brought up. I am very disappointed by this moment. I'm actually stunned by the fact that we are going to have a straight party line vote on someone who is so clearly unqualified for this office, who so clearly misled this committee, who so clearly has many areas of his background that this committee has not thoroughly explored that point to some serious potential for conflicts or worse. But with that, in hopes that I am trying to keep my testimony, my comments under 5 minutes, which I have failed to do, but I am concluding, sir. Mr. Chairman, I am stunned and perplexed at this moment that I have been asked to talk for 2 minutes. For the record, the chairman has said that I make a lot of sense. But he disagrees with me. Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to cede to you. If you would like to filibuster, you're welcome to. I'm sure that the committee of this committee would allow you to sit here quietly. But if not, I would very much like to hear Lindsey Graham speak on the virtues of the great state of New Jersey.
It's not going to be a long speech.
Wow.
New Jersey.
Wow.
My brother-in-law is from New Jersey, and we like him a lot.
That I will take that as a testimony. Thank you, sir.
And happy birthday to Dick Blumenthal.
The Senate rules limit the time for committee meetings, and so I need to call the roll call vote. I will allow anyone who still wishes to speak on this nomination to do so after we vote. On the favorably reporting the nomination of Kash Patel to be Director of Federal Bureau of Investigation, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Graham.
Aye.
Mr. Cornyn.
Aye. Used to be in a
Mr.
tent.
Lee.
Aye.
Mr. Cruz.
Aye.
Mr. Hawley.
Aye.
Mr. Tillis.
Aye.
Mr. Kennedy. Mrs. Blackburn. Aye. Mr. Schmidt. Mrs. Britt. Mrs. Moody. Mr. Durbin.
No.
Mr. Whitehouse.
No.
Ms. Klobuchar.
No.
Mr. Coons.
He wants to know by proxy.
No by proxy.
Mr. Blumenthal.
No.
I guess until we.
Ms. Hirono. No. Mr. Booker.
No.
Mr. Padilla.
No.
Mr. Welch.
No.
Mr. Schiff.
No.
Chairman Grassley.
Aye.
On this vote, the ayes are 12, the nays are 10.
The vote of 12 to 10, the nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. Do you want to speak? Yeah, please do now. And will some, I got to go vote, will some senator on my side stay? Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe that this country, in this Congress, is in the midst of what has been a slow-moving but rapidly accelerating constitutional crisis. It began most visibly on January 6th of 2021, when the two norms of this republic, the peaceful transfer of power and the renunciation of violence, were breached. And where many members of the House and Senate voted against certifying the election of the person chosen by the American people. President Trump then, and President Trump today, continues to assert that the 2020 election was stolen. Stop the steal. He won the 2024 election. His election was certified. He's entitled, as president, to vigorously use the powers of the presidency to implement the policies that he advocates. He's not entitled to violate the Constitution in his effort to do so. Mr. Chairman, in my view, the beginning of the Trump administration is showing a contempt for the Constitution and a lawlessness that is dangerous to the future of our republic. Freezing federal spending, clearly unconstitutional. Shutting down agencies created by Congress with no authority to do so. Removing leaders of agencies, including inspector generals, against the clear requirements of law. Firing government employees who have civil service protections. Threatening to deport people based on their political views
revoking by executive authority birthright citizenship. These are just some of the actions that the president has taken where he has no authority to do so. On Monday, a federal judge said that the White House defied his order to release billions of dollars in federal grants, marking the first time a judge has expressly declared that the Trump administration is disobeying a judicial mandate. This country is headed into a situation where, in addition to acting without authority, the president is indicating he will defy rulings from the third branch of our government, the judiciary. Vice President Vance has made very clear his point of view on this. Judges aren't allowed to control the executive's legitimate powers. Of course, under our Constitution, since Marbury versus Madison, the court is the final arbiter of what is constitutional or what is not. My colleagues, my view of this is that the administration is showing maximum contempt for core constitutional values, including, most importantly, the separation of powers. We have a dilemma here. There are many in this committee that are fully in support of the policies that President Trump is pursuing. That's, of course, your right and his right. But the unique responsibility each of us as a United States Senator has is to guarantee that in pursuit of those policies, it is done within the constitutional boundaries. This is not just to talk about civic aspiration. It's a recognition that the separation of powers, that the system of checks and balances, that the concept that ambition in the executive should be matched with ambition in the legislature, has held this country together for 250 years. We have fierce debates about important public policy matters. But what allows us to resolve those, despite disagreements, intense disagreements, is the pushing and the shoving, the engagement, the winning and moving forward, losing a fight and falling back, but all within the norms of the Constitution. That's being threatened, and I don't say that lightly. But what has happened on January 6th is continuing. And where we saw the Stop the Steal, the renunciation of the decision that the American people made on 2020 in that election, and the candidates, many of them who came before us, including Mr. Patel, unable to simply say who won the 2020 election, continuing the Stop the Steal narrative. And then with President Trump, in his first weeks in office, acting in ways that challenge the constitutional order. I'm voting against Mr. Patel because he is clearly an instrument in that effort to continue eroding the precepts of the Constitution on the separation of powers. My colleagues, this is a very difficult time, particularly for my colleagues on the Republican side. You support many of the President Trump's policies, and as I say, that's your right. But it is so essential to each of us as a U.S. Senator to make our own judgments about whether the manner in which power is being used on the executive branch is a threat to the power of the legislative branch, the Article I branch. We, each of us, must be custodians of that constitutional order in our role as the legislature in it. Tough judgments that have to be made. My judgment is that the president is showing absolute contempt for the United States Congress. And the next stop is contempt for the United States judiciary. I cannot vote for a person who signed on to that agenda. I yield the floor.
Senator Schiff will be joining us shortly. To my friend, Senator Welch, I hope we have a great relationship, but some of the things that he was talking about, the tug and pull of the executive and the legislative branch, plays out this way every time you have a transition of power. The best example I can use is a very current example right now between a Democrat governor and a Republican legislature in the state of North Carolina. We have a new governor who in his first 90 days is probably going to do, as he should, push the boundaries of the executive branch. That's their job. The same thing with President Trump. We need to continue to assert that there are very clear differences enshrined in the Constitution between who has authority, but to pretend that that just occurred in this administration is looking past the endless speeches that were made over the last 4 years about President Biden stretching his authority, being challenged in court, et cetera. So I don't think that this is new, and I do believe that getting back to Mr. Patel, that he's been treated unfairly. I had some posters here I'm not going to use, didn't even intend to speak until we determined that we need to allow more time for Mr. Schiff. But I heard a lot of people say in their comments, if the allegations are true. Now, this is coming from my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. So they're not 100% they're sure, but it sure certainly fits comfortably into a narrative in opposition to Mr. Patel. We heard a video referenced, I think, by Senator Whitehouse about, I think it was Senator Whitehouse, one of the members here, talking about the chopping of logs of the people on the so-called enemies list, which was an index to a book that Mr. Patel wrote and published. If you kept watching that same video that he didn't produce, and it was many years ago, you'll see that he was also chopping off at the end of the log MAGA, Truth Social, and a couple of other logos. Yeah, just put that up real quick. So everybody conveniently stops, presses pause at the point to make their argument. But if they've gone a little bit further, they would have seen other things are coming off the log. So guys, let's be fulsome in our research, or our response, or our basis for opposing or supporting a nominee. I think Mr. Patel is going to come and fix an agency that I have great admiration for, that I still believe is the gold standard for law enforcement agencies in the world, in the history of the world. But to suggest that others should not be put under a microscope, I think, is naive. I supported Chris Wray, and yet he disappointed me in that he is at the top of the agency and there were inappropriate investigations going along. I supported Merrick Garland when he was put forth by Senator Biden, and yet he's disappointed me with some investigations and activities in the DOJ that were absolutely inappropriate under his watch. Did he know about it? I don't know. But what I do know is he was the head of the organization, and at some point you have to hold people in these organizations accountable. I trusted Mr. Comey until he gave me a reason not to. So for people to think that we should keep the FBI as it is and not question some of the politically motivated activities, whether a Democrat or a Republican is in power, are either being naive or just waiting for the opportunity when that slant is in the favor of their own their worldview. I, for one, want the FBI to do the job it does very well and nothing more. Never to be motivated by political retribution. I said yesterday to a nominee, this needs to end. The political physics of for every action there's an opposite and equal reaction is what is tarnishing the reputation of the finest law enforcement agency recognized that way worldwide, and we can do better. There were other people that were saying that Mr. Patel condoned the January 6 attacks. I asked him when he was sitting right there, does he agree with me that people that attack Capitol Police officers are thugs? And he said that if he were asked by the president to have given pardons to those thugs that attack Capitol Police officers, that his recommendation would have been no. And yet people want to pretend that he was okay with that, coming in as the head of the FBI. So folks, let's just be honest here. There was someone else who said, there was a Republican that said this is a shirts and skins exercise. I'm the one that said it. Because when you see Pam Bondi, who has personal relationships with people on the other side of the aisle, not get a single Democrat vote from this committee, then clearly we're in a shirts and skins posture. Not always, probably not even for the remainder of this Congress, but right now I stand by that characterization, and we saw it play out again here today. So unless Senator Durbin has anything to say, we'll be at ease until Senator Schiff arrives.
Keeping the committee in session, to give me an opportunity to weigh in on this nomination. Before I address Mr. Patel, I do want to address the continuing narrative about the weaponization of the DOJ, the supposed weaponization of the DOJ over the last 4 years, because to me it represents the most vigorous reinvention of history. The question is asked by some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, why is it that Donald Trump was the only president to be indicted not once, not twice, but 4 times. And isn't this, by definition, a double standard, a treating of this president differently because no other president in history has been indicted so many times? Well, the one doesn't fall from the other. Yes, this president was indicted more than any other president in history because this president committed more crimes than any other president in history. And let's look at what he was indicted for, because we can't just talk about this in the abstract. He was indicted for inciting a violent attack on the Capitol to stop the peaceful transfer of power. And yes, he's the only president ever to be indicted on those charges because he's the only president to have incited a violent attack on the Capitol. That doesn't mean a double standard was applied to Mr. Trump. It means the rule of law was applied to Mr. Trump. Indeed, the fact he was charged was a vindication of the rule of law, that we are a nation of laws, not a nation of men. It was an affirmation of that principle, not its abrogation. The fact that Donald Trump was indicted for bringing hundreds of classified documents to Mar-a-Lago, for refusing to relinquish them, for participating in an effort to obstruct the investigation into their unlawful retention, doesn't mean some double standard was applied to him. It means the same standard was applied to him as anyone who willfully brought hundreds of classified documents home, refused to turn them over, and then conspired with others to obstruct the investigation. Others who were involved in hiding the documents, others who were involved in trying to delete surveillance tapes. The fact that Donald Trump was indicted for making hush money payments to a porn star to hide this from voters before the election in violation of the campaign laws, the fact that he was the first to be indicted for that, well, probably means he was the first presidential candidate to be making hush money payments to a porn star to hide it from voters. And so let's not suggest, let's not market, let's not propagandize about some weaponization, some double standard when grand juries found probable cause to believe he committed these crimes, and the only case that was actually allowed to go to trial, the jury found him guilty on every single charge. Now, my colleagues on the other side say, we have to restore confidence in the Department of Justice and the FBI because the public has such low confidence in them. Well, yes, of course the public has low confidence in the department. The department has been trashed by the former and now current president for years. Of course, with that kind of circular logic, there's a low opinion of the department and the Bureau because it's been trashed for years. And why has it been trashed? Because the people of the Department of Justice and the FBI had the audacity to believe what we were saying. That is, there is one standard for the rule of law. It applies to everyone equally. It even applies to the high and mighty. It even applies to the President of the United States. I've worked with the FBI since I was a prosecutor more than 30 years ago. They're the finest law enforcement agency in the country. I don't think they have any near peer. They are the best of the best. And to see what they're going through now with this purge, this witch hunt, is just awful for such dedicated public servants. And it's not just, as many of my colleagues have been emphasizing, it's not just that they were assigned cases they had no discretion about taking. Yes, that's true. But it's not just that. It's the fact that these cases were also deeply legitimate cases involving people who violently attacked this building, including, by the way, a prosecutor named Emil Bove, one of the guys leading this witch hunt. It was just revealed at the Southern District of New York, where he was working at the time, was one of the aggressive prosecutors working with the FBI on these January 6 cases. Now, he's the guy helping to lead the Inquisition in the FBI, the purging, the witch hunt. So this is what we're doing to the FBI right now. Now, Kash Patel was asked in committee And he was asked after committee. We've already talked about what he was asked in committee. Let me just read the questions I asked him for the record and his answers. And bear in mind, this is just a few days after his testimony, or immediately after his testimony, and I asked, it has been reported that senior career officials across DOJ have been reassigned or fired since President Trump's inauguration. More than a dozen officials who worked on the special counsel team that investigated Donald Trump and 2 separate criminal cases were fired by Acting Attorney General James McHenry. Within the FBI, senior leaders were ordered to retire, resign, or be fired by February 3rd, 2025. Question, were you aware of these personnel moves before they occurred? Answer, not that I recall. Were you consulted by anyone at the White House, DOJ, or FBI about any of these personnel decisions? Answer, not that I recall. Have you had any conversations with the White House, DOJ, or FBI about these or other personnel moves at the FBI? Not that I recall. Okay, it's one thing if we're talking about events that happened 2 years ago or 4 years ago or 10 years ago. It might be appropriate to say, not that I recall. These were things, conversations he was asked about that happened days or hours earlier. He really doesn't recall whether he talked to people at the White House about firing people at the Department of the FBI. Are we really to believe he doesn't recall? And now, of course, we have whistleblowers who say that he was leading these firings, that he suddenly doesn't recall. That's just not the least bit credible that he doesn't remember. Of course he remembers. I don't recall, not that I recall. That's the language an attorney tells you to use when you want to perjure yourself, but you don't want to be caught in a perjury. This is who we're voting to make the director of the FBI, the guy who says, I don't recall whether I participated in ordering the firing of people. I don't recall. This is the guy who testified to this committee, I think, when Ranking Member Durbin asked him about his role in producing song with the people who attacked police on January 6th. I had nothing to do with the recording, he told us. Of course, we know because it was recorded. There he was on Steve Bannon's podcast saying, yeah, we took the recording to the studio, and yeah, we digitized it, we mastered it, we. And when he's confronted with this during the committee, he gives us the novel defense, we doesn't include me. We doesn't include me now. I don't know what's worse, the fact that Kash Patel wanted to take credit for making a song with convicted felons who attacked police officers, or wanted to take credit for something he never did, or he did it and he lied about it. But either way, it's pretty damning for anyone, let alone someone who would be the director of the FBI. This is a guy also who was called before the grand jury, first probably nominee for FBI director in history, called before the grand jury, refused to testify in a criminal case without getting immunity. Plead the fifth, demanded immunity. This is going to be the FBI director, a guy who won't testify in a case investigated by the FBI without getting immunity? A guy who has, I guess, stock options worth $1 to $5 million from a company financed by the Chinese Communist Party? And we still don't know what he did to earn $1 to $5 million from a company affiliated with the Chinese Communist Party, who made money from some Czechoslovak group, an arms conglomerate with ties to Putin. We still don't really know what he did to earn money from them either. This is really astounding that we are where we are. I've known Kash Patel since he was a staffer for Devin Nunes. He is not someone you would ever think of when you think of fidelity, bravery, integrity. Not when he was a staffer, not when he was in the Trump administration. In fact, the people who speak most damningly of Kash Patel are the people who worked with him in the administration. People like Bill Barr, who, for a lesser position, said over my dead body when asked about Kash Patel. It is just a tragedy for the FBI that it comes to this. I can't imagine the demoralization at the FBI and at the Department of Justice. The damage will be long, long standing. It seems my colleagues are determined to confirm him on the Senate floor. And to all those FBI agents I worked with over the years, to all that are there now that I've not had the privilege of working with, my heart breaks for what you're about to go through with leadership that you cannot respect, who has not earned your respect, who will not earn your respect. I know you will put your head down and do your jobs because you're professionals. I hope you stay at the FBI. I hope you don't leave, because if you're committed to the mission and you leave, then it's going to just leave behind people who are less committed to the mission. So I hope you'll stay. I hope you'll gut it out. I hope the same is true of the career professionals at the Department of Justice who are the subjects of a similar witch hunt. I spent almost 6 years in that department. I venerate that department. And we need the career civil servants, public servants who serve in both those institutions. But it will be a sad day indeed when we confirm the likes of Kash Patel, knowing what we are getting. We will have no one but ourselves to blame. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I will close with this commentary. We've talked about and listened to people hypothesizing about Patel taking leads from the White House. We have plenty of evidence that the White House telegraphed to the Department of Justice about these prosecutions. We have Biden complaining that Garland didn't start soon enough. And then you have this coincidence of Trump announcing for re-election in December 2022. And then all of a sudden in 2023, you have 4 indictments. What a coincidence. Meeting adjourned.